Welcome to Next Round with the Pacific Research Institute. I'm your host, Rowena Ichon. This podcast is from a recorded webinar featuring a conversation with special guest Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos and PRI's own Senior Director of Education, Lance Izumi. Secretary DeVos and Lance discussed school reopenings during the coronavirus pandemic, the Trump administration's support for school choice, charter schools, and civic education in America's schools. Thanks for joining us.
Hello and welcome. My name is Lance Izumi, and I'm the Senior Director of the Center for Education at the Pacific Research Institute. The Pacific Research Institute is a California-based public policy research organization which is committed to promoting freedom, opportunity, and personal responsibility through free market solutions. We're very pleased and greatly honored to have with us today United States Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos. Secretary DeVos has been involved in education policy for nearly 3 decades now. She's especially passionate about reforms that help underserved children gain access to a quality education. I had the pleasure of meeting with Secretary DeVos a couple years ago in her office where we had a chance to discuss my book, The Corrupt Classroom. And in addition to our great policy discussions, she was incredibly gracious and kind. So, Madam Secretary, thank you so much for joining us. And I would like to start by giving you the opportunity to say a few words about the issues and priorities that are especially important to you right now.
Well, thank you so much, Lance, and friends at Pacific Research Institute. I appreciate the opportunity to join you this afternoon. And while we'd much rather be together in person, it's really great that technology allows us to be together this way. But I think it goes without saying that we're all navigating uncharted times. And when it comes to their children's education, parents know this better than ever before. This spring, parents tried valiantly to step up to the plate, becoming full-time teachers in addition to keeping their day jobs, all the while worrying about their family's health and safety. Parents are now much more attuned to what their children need to learn and to thrive. And many are making different decisions based on what they've observed or on what schools are or aren't doing to meet their children's needs. Some are in a position to choose to homeschool, to start a micro school or a pod, to enroll in a different school that's open for in-person learning. But far too many of our nation's parents, maybe you or someone you know, are stuck with no options, no help, and no way out. That's why President Trump and I are fighting every day for more options, more opportunities, more education freedom for all students. The president promised in 2016 to provide school choice to every disadvantaged child in America. Here's how we're working to keep that promise. First, we restored state, local, and family control of education by faithfully implementing the Every Student Succeeds Act, by ending Common Core, by urging Congress to put an end to education earmarks in the federal budget, by proposing to consolidate nearly all federal K-12 programs into one block grant with fewer federal strings attached. And importantly, we've lit a prairie fire across America for parental school choice. Countless surveys are showing more and more families today support parental choice than ever before. A very recent Real Clear Opinion survey found that 3 out of 4 families with children in public schools want their education dollars to follow their children wherever they go to learn. And notably, 73% of Black families and 71% of Hispanic families say they want the same thing. To that end, we've proposed establishing a federal tax credit to support parental choice programs in states and encourage states to expand their existing state programs. And many of them have. More students in Arizona, in Florida, and even in Illinois have more choices. We've expanded the DC voucher program by 50%, and there's still unmet demand. We supported the creation of more public charter schools with a particular focus in opportunity zones, 70% of which currently don't have any public charter schools. We reformed the tax code so families can use tax-preferred 529 savings accounts for expenses related to K-12 education. We joined parents in Montana in their fight to end the last acceptable prejudice made manifest in bigoted Blaine amendments, which deny students the freedom to pursue faith-based education. We're strongly urging that schools be open for in-person learning as an important option for the families who want or who need it. And we support the bipartisan School Choice Now Act, which would directly fund families and allow them to choose the best educational setting for their child. In fact, a majority in the United States Senate recently voted in favor of Tim Scott's provision to do just that. I think you all know Senator Scott. He knows that students need access to more education opportunities, more options right now. Families could use scholarships to enhance distance learning or to pay for other costs tied to educating children at home. They could be used for tutoring, for career and technical education, or for transportation to a different public school. The scholarships could support students attending the school that best meets their needs or matches their values. At the end of the day, we want everyone to have the freedom and choices to make the best decision for their children. It's been said that all great change in America starts at the kitchen table, then it spreads to communities, and then across the country. So we urge each of you to talk to your neighbors, pray with your pastors, let local leaders know where you stand, to raise your voices on behalf of parents across the country for school choice now. Parental school choice is what all Americans want and need, and I know you'll join me and the President in fighting for that freedom. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you today, and I look forward to our questions.
Well, thank you very much, Secretary DeVos, for those opening remarks. And I mean, there's so much packed into them, so, let's try and, touch on a number of the key points that you brought up during your remarks and kind of get into a slightly deeper dive on them. Of course, many parents across the country are concerned about schools reopening and in many cases not reopening. And one of the things we're seeing is that states are now reporting that there have been decreases in student learning because of the lack of reopening. Here in Los Angeles, out here in California, there's been a lawsuit by parents who have sued the Los Angeles School District because of what they consider to be inadequate distance learning. So, I mean, given this situation, what are your thoughts, specifically about the reopening of schools for in-person instruction?
Well, the President and I have been very consistent on this. We have said and urged states and districts and school buildings to be open for in-person instruction in every possible situation. We know that in some places where there is a spike in cases of the virus, that there may have to be short times of working at a distance. But for those families who need and want this for their children, learning in person, there's no other substitute for it. And we know kids today have been suffering by learning at a distance when it simply doesn't work for them, or when the quality of the materials presented or the method in which it's presented simply doesn't work. And so we have continued to urge states and districts to make sure they're offering this as an option to families. Of course, these are state and local decisions, but we will continue to use the bully pulpit to urge this to happen. I've visited a number of schools in the last few weeks that have opened for in-person learning, and it can be done. It can be done safely, and the kids are thrilled when they're back together.
No, I know exactly right. One of my relatives, their small daughter has just returned to school out in Alabama, I believe, and you couldn't have seen a more happy 6-year-old than her going back to her school and participating in gymnastics and going to class again. So it is really important for the kids. And you made remarks talked about, of course, school choice. And one of the things that we saw, even prior to COVID, was that we've seen dips in the test scores on for example, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, and the scores in reading and math have dipped downward. And probably not coincidentally, we've seen an surge in support for school choice. You talked about school choice, briefly in your remarks, but perhaps you can talk a little bit more about the School Choice Now Act and how that encompasses some of the proposals that the Trump administration has been pushing throughout the first term.
Well, Lance, we know that parents are, as I mentioned, more attuned than ever before to their children's education experience, having observed it firsthand in the spring months and weeks. And we know that many of them have been disappointed or underwhelmed with how their students, what their students' opportunities have been. Many of them are making different choices and decisions. Those that have the means and the opportunity to do so are doing that as their schools are not responding in the ways that they hoped they would this fall. The president and I and this administration have advanced a very specific proposal that would help meet families' needs immediately and then provide a vehicle in the longer term to really give rocket fuel to states' efforts to give parents choices and freedom in choosing their kids' education. And what it would do is provide some immediate funds for relief for students currently enrolled in private schools to be able to continue to access them if their family's been economically impacted through this pandemic. And then it would set up a longer term $5 billion a year tax credit pool distributed to states that wanted to participate to come alongside their efforts and their initiatives in each state to provide scholarships directly to families. And it could be for a wide range of opportunities, from course choice in a small rural school to starting a micro school or supporting these new pod environments. So the sky would be the limit, really, on the ways that the creativity, that the freedom could be used to directly meet kids' needs as determined by their families.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that is all just absolutely terrific. I think that one of the points that I note in the legislation is that for those people who are worried that somehow the federal government is going to somehow get control of local education through this, that there are important protections that are built into the legislation. Yeah. Isn't that correct?
That is correct. And I am and the president are very strong federalists. We do not want the federal government more involved in things than the federal government must be. And we were very careful in working with the legislators on this proposal to ensure that there would be no increase in the size or scope of the federal government. The tax credit fund or pool would simply be the vehicle to get those funds for individuals or businesses to redirect a small portion of their federal tax bill into scholarship granting organizations at the state level. And so no new federal bureaucracy would be created. And importantly, the proposal itself calls out very specific protections for schools and for states to ensure that there is no more entanglement or no more requirements on the part of the federal government in those programs.
I think that's incredibly important, and I think that will be greatly reassuring to people who want to make sure that any additional help that comes from Washington also doesn't interfere with local control. So that's really great news. I want to go back a little bit more to the COVID crisis, and research that's come out has shown that charter schools have pivoted to the online learning reality that we have now during the COVID pandemic, better than many regular public school districts. And yet what we're seeing is that charter schools are being attacked on many fronts. And for example, in your own home state of Michigan, and just as in my home state here in California, online charter schools are not receiving the full student funding. What are your thoughts about the challenges that are facing charter schools right now? And what do you see going forward, the future for charter schools?
Well, charter schools are an important choice and an important option for families. And we see some, at least some of them in nearly every state across the country. I think only 4 states that don't yet have any charter schools in them. And there's tremendous demand for them, more than 1 million families that are on wait lists across the country. These are important options and important choices. And Lance, you've identified very clearly the fact that many of them have been much more nimble and flexible and prepared to pivot as needed in this time of COVID crisis to continue learning for their students, to continue to provide a full-time learning experience, whether it was remote in the spring or now back in person this fall. And so these choices and these options have got to be protected and frankly expanded for families because the demand is there and we know that they're meeting the needs of so many students. The results, a lot of the critics will question the results from charter schools, but the reality is that the first and most important measure is that families, parents, and students are choosing these schools. They're not being forced to go there, much like many students are to schools in their assigned geography where they don't have an option to move somewhere else. We've got to make those choices and those options much more broadly available. And the support for that is frankly continuing to grow by leaps and bounds as more parents experience this firsthand with their kids.
Yeah, I absolutely think so. And, I think that it certainly doesn't make sense to me anyway that you would have attacks on charter schools, especially those that specialize in online learning, during the midst of a time where, most kids are having to distance learn and learn through online tools, and to undercut the very schools that specialize in that just doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Right. No, it doesn't make any sense at all. And we should be embracing those opportunities and certainly facilitating families making those choices if that's the right answer for their kids.
Yeah, absolutely right. One of the other things that you mentioned in your opening remarks was, the issue of homeschooling. And that what we're seeing during this COVID crisis is that polling has also showed that you've had a surge in interest amongst parents who are not only interested in homeschooling now during the COVID crisis, but interested perhaps in continuing homeschooling even after the crisis is eventually over. Yet at the same time, we're seeing, for example, some attacks starting on homeschooling. For example, there was a well-publicized article by a Harvard academic who advocated the complete ban on homeschooling. So I want to ask you what your thoughts are about homeschooling, how it's meeting the needs of children and parents, and what do you see as its future going down the road?
Well, homeschooling is a wonderful option for many families, and I think many parents, many students have found over the spring months that educating and learning at home has actually worked very well for them. And we know that there are many parents this fall who have made that choice because they simply want to have the predictability and to be able to really control the continued learning for their children if their schools have let them down. And so it is an option and it is a choice that we should be embracing. And you referenced the planned conference that Harvard was going to have that was essentially an attack on homeschooling. At least everything published about it was. It was very ill-timed since I think it was planned for sometime in June, but they quickly pulled that down when they realized, the reality is all families had to school at home this spring out of necessity. And many of them have found that this is actually a really good answer and a really good solution for their kids going forward. And we should be supporting that and enabling that for families.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think, a couple things is that, first of all, you're seeing support for homeschooling grow in places where you might not think there would be supports. Like in New York State, I saw that there was a poll out there where a very high percentage of parents now are considering homeschooling even after the crisis is over. And, I think that parents are finding that there are, not only can they do it, but there are lots of tools available for them to actually make it a very doable operation for them. And there's lots of free curricula out there that is available to parents, and so that it's something that they're finding out that education isn't this mystery box that they thought it was.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And the last several months have certainly allowed a lot of parents to find out that this is actually a really great option for their child.
No, absolutely. Well, you've been, as you've mentioned during your remarks, and that I mentioned when I introduced you, that you've been a great supporter of education reform for your entire adult life. But over the last few years, we've seen growing militancy amongst the teacher unions. Recent strikes, we all know, involved not just disputes over wages and benefits, but actually also involved issues of political demands by the teachers unions and demands especially against education reform proposals. And so, I wanted to ask what your thoughts were about this trend and its impact on children, and also too, the impact on ordinary classroom teachers who may not agree with the direction of their own unions.
Well, I think it's frankly a very bad trend because it's not focused on doing what's right for students. It's focused on adult issues and protecting adult positions, adult power, and frankly, at the core, it's all around the resources and the power. And this is not focused on doing what's right for kids. And I think more and more people are learning this and seeing this exposed as we see some of the behaviors in many major school districts across the country this fall. And, I think if we refocus on doing the things that are required to meet the needs of students, we get different answers. And I think also of so many amazing teachers that I've met across the country and I hear from on a regular basis. When we talk about school choice and empowering families with that choice, we also ultimately talk about empowering teachers with choices as well. A teacher, a high quality, great teacher is the most valuable piece of the equation when it comes to a child's education. And I can't tell you how many teachers I've talked with over the years who have felt sort of forced into a box in their current environment because they if they do anything that is different than or contrary to what they have been told they must do, they're basically shamed or put back into that box again. And I've spoken with many teachers who were teachers of the year in their state or their district, and after going around for their year of recognition, they have come back and been put back in that box and ultimately left the classroom and left teaching because they became so frustrated. That is tragic. And we have got to honor and respect and give teachers the opportunity to advance their own careers and to be in environments that are going to challenge them and be great for them. By the same token, we want to do the same thing in empowering families to make those choices for their children. School choice, parental choice, education freedom can be a win-win for families with school-age children and for great teachers.
No, I couldn't agree with you more, Secretary. I've talked to many teachers myself, and they say the same thing that you mentioned, that they want to focus on teaching their kids. They love their kids, they love teaching, but when politics and other kind of education issues start creeping in, it makes their jobs difficult and actually repels them from the profession, which is, incredibly unfortunate because, especially if they're really great teachers who are really adding to the knowledge base of their students.
That's right. That's right.
So, getting into into the classroom then, since we're talking about teachers, you gave a great speech a couple years ago on Constitution Day. And you talked about the importance of our constitutional rights, such as First Amendment free speech rights on campus. I was wondering if you could give us your thoughts about protecting these rights in schools and colleges, plus how civics education specifically should teach our children about our constitutional rights, which is, something, of course, which is very topical right now.
Absolutely. Well, and as you well know, we just celebrated Constitution Day again a couple of weeks ago. And I took the opportunity, and I would encourage anybody who's interested. I made my Constitution Day remarks at Mount Vernon this year. And it was an awesome setting to talk about the importance of learning our nation's history and learning about our government and how it works. Because if this generation and successive generations don't learn history, we're bound to repeat the history that we don't want to repeat. And I talked a lot about the fact that in our Constitution, in our founding documents, the phrase "toward a more perfect union," we're only going to get better when we learn from our past and improve on our past. And having the exchange of ideas in both K-12 and higher ed settings, and allowing for students to learn how to do that well, and to challenge one another with ideas without challenging one another personally, is just an imperative if we're going to continue to enjoy the kind of nation that we inherited and preserve it for the future. And so I think we've had a lot of focus around the importance of our Constitution and our founding documents recently, and I hope that school-age children will take a serious look at what they've missed thus far and fill in those blanks. And I urge and encourage education leaders and parents to make sure we are focusing on preparing our students, our young people, for their future by teaching them history and civics and a solid foundation in our nation's origination and founding.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, Secretary. I'm actually, when I was an undergraduate, I was a history major, so I, always enjoyed history, and it, pains me right now to see kind of the impact of leaving out important parts of history from, unfortunately, in many classrooms, and I see that, many students actually have no, for example, understanding truly of communism and
Right.
ideologies like that, and you can't have critical, deep thinking, which is what all of us in education want for our children to have for them to think critically about issues, if they don't have the actual information, factual information about some of these important things that in order to think critically about. So
That's right. That's right.
So. There are there's so many issues out there where we appreciate the time you've given us, but just in concluding, I know there are issues like religious liberty and lots of different issues out there that your department has addressed recently. But are there any other concluding thoughts that you have for us today?
Well, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to join you this afternoon, to encourage you all to really use your voices to encourage the momentum that has built around giving parents the freedom to choose their children's education setting. I like to think of it as, seeing kids go to school every day with their backpacks. let's envision putting those resources that would go to that child's education in that child's backpack to take to whatever education setting is going to be the right one for that child, whether it's their assigned geographic public school or a charter school or a private school or a virtual school or a homeschool or some combination thereof. Parents have to have the ability to make those choices. We know that families with means are making those choices today. All families need to make those choices, and we will have a better, stronger country as a result.
Well, thank you so much, Secretary DeVos. This has been a great conversation, and we really appreciate your efforts to improve the quality of education for all children in America. So thank you so much from all of us here at Pacific Research Institute, and to thank you all to all of those who are watching today and in the future when we post this on YouTube and other sites. To find out more information about the Pacific Research Institute, you can go to www.pacificresearch.org. And again, from all of us at the Pacific Research Institute, we want to thank Secretary DeVos again for her time and her wisdom in chatting with us today. And thank you, all of you who are watching on this broadcast.
Thanks, Lance. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks to our special guests, Education Secretary Betsy DeVos and Lance Izumi. If you like this episode, please tell your friends and subscribe to PRI's podcast at iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. And when you're on these platforms, don't forget to give us a big 5 stars. If you don't subscribe to any of these, you can still listen on PRI's YouTube page, youtube.com/Pacific Research 1. That's the number 1. Thanks for listening. I'm Rowena Ichon. Hope you'll come back again for next round with PRI.